We just heard the prophet Jeremiah speak his first words in today's lesson, rather dramatic, terror on every side, very panicky, and the church tells us more why. Now, 90 days ago, 3 months, we've experienced a different form of panic that was on the lips probably of the Center for Disease Control and the media and everyone, governors and so on. A pandemic that is still with us, and many people feel a terror on every side. We fear large gatherings, we wear face masks, and we ask ourselves, when will this end, or will it get worse in the autumn? But today, Jeremiah, although we can relate with our emotions to what he's doing, he's not speaking of an organic virus or some biological pandemic. It's something worse. It is not a physical terror that he's afraid of. Rather, he fears a spiritual violence that surrounds him. So no mask, no social distancing can save him. What Jeremiah fears is also common to others in Scripture in the long history of our religion. Jesus puts a real face to it in the gospel just read. He says, "Do not fear those who can kill the body, but not the soul." You know, not just a disease killing the body, but he's talking about execution, murder, silencing people, but they can't hurt the soul of the person. Many people willingly submit to death rather than give up their morals. But Jesus says, fear those who can kill both the body and the soul. And that's what Jeremiah is afraid of happening. His enemy is an evil that is caused by sinful people in his own time. His calling was to be a prophet, and therefore he didn't really want to be. It wasn't a choice of his, it was God's choice. But he submitted to it because that was the meaningful life to which he was called. So his enemy is not a disease, or you could say it is a spiritual type of virus. He is about to become their next victim. Watch the words that follow it. They're very scary. But even though he's writing this about 600 years before the birth of Christ, prior to his lifetime, all through history, even in the 20th and 21st century, the same thing has happened. This is what he says. He's talking about the scoundrels, the assassins. All those who were my friends are now on the watch for any misstep of mine. He's talking about the backstabbers, the people who schmooze up to you, and they're your allies and friends, and one day they turn against you, and they're taking you into jail, or they're accusing you and getting rid of you. And they're saying, Jeremiah quotes, he says, they say, perhaps Jeremiah will be trapped, then we can prevail. This is a man who's very threatened by a deeper evil than a pandemic. He is outnumbered by evil people, and they happen to be his fellow citizens and even his fellow believers. So it's not the outsiders who are the worst enemies for him and for many of the so-called prophets. And eventually he will be put to death. He'll be executed. What is happening to Jeremiah in this excerpt? For that matter, we can say not only why is it happening, but let's look at the other personalities that may help us illustrate a modern problem today. These same things happened to people prior to his time, like Elijah, who's like the icon of all prophets. Most of Elijah's work, unpopular, same job, go to the king, go to the government, go to the political system, and go to the temple and to the high priest and stuff. Everything is off track. It's corrupt. It's decaying. And someone has to straighten it out. We always pray to God for salvation. The Hebrews did way back with Abraham and Moses and David. Well, if salvation occurred, if God answered these prayers, as we asked him to in the psalm we just sang, what would it look like if God did it? And he's very busy, but he's working through his agents. And the same things happened to Isaiah, Ezekiel, later on, Queen Esther, John the Baptizer, cousin of the Lord, who testified to the truth. A very simple man, lived very simply in the wilderness, away from the busy, big urban centers of luxury and comfort, and he simply challenged the king, a fellow Jew, about the faith and practicing the faith the way the Lord wants it. For the background of the stability of a state in ancient Israel is their conformity and obedience to the ways of God all through their history. And Herod was a very wicked man, a corrupt man, nominally a Jew. And John the Baptist paid for his testimony to the truth with the cost of his life. And of course, we have other people later in Easter time, the works of Peter, a very reformed first pope, a rather weak man at first, now a courageous man who will eventually be crucified in Rome. Paul, a convert to the faith, one of its best spokesmen, suffers all kinds of things in his many missionary journeys, ends up also being executed in Rome. These people gave their lives up for the truth, which is embodied in Christ himself, who is the icon, the God of all the martyrs, the God of all the prophets. That sets a tone. This is not just about religious people talking about which catechism is better or which translation of the Bible is better. You know, if God cannot bring the people of this world into a sense of stability, fairness, and justice in this life, it's all going to become unglued. We've seen many episodes of violence, even in our own country recently. How often did Jesus in his own lifetime confront, like Jeremiah, his fellow believers, both among the clergy and among the political system, to constantly do what Jeremiah feared, to trap him, to look for any excuse to get him. And finally, they were able to do that the night after the Last Supper. So they actively sought ways to stop him, trap him through his speeches, and to find ways and excuses to accuse him, say, of blaspheming. In every age, though, there have been prophets before Christ, and there are prophets today after Christ. And so even in the political sphere, which is often where this has to happen, you know, we ask God to take care of the poor. That was mentioned in the psalm we just chanted. Jeremiah ends with a salute to the God who hears the cry of the poor. Well, the poor don't need more church services necessarily. It wouldn't hurt to open things up. They want an adequate income or health care or employment and so forth. They want a stable life free of crime and evil things. And that's a concern in every age. So in the political sphere, both in decades and centuries past, there have been countless heroes and heroines who have spoken out about the truth in society against corrupt governments, dictatorial regimes, those who silence the opposition. For example, consider in the middle of the 20th century, the worst of world wars, World War II, Nazi Germany. Socialism, Nazi socialism, began to arrest people who criticized the socialist government, and they put them in these things called concentration camps, the Arbeitslager, which later also became the death camps against the Jewish people in the Holocaust. Stalin's Russia, long before World War II and after, the gulags of Soviet Russia, really almost until communism collapsed. And God knows what's going on there now. After the Vietnam War in Southeast Asia, the killing fields of Cambodia under the Pol Pot regime. And there are other examples too. Just a few years ago, a tremendous count of murder and assassinations in Mexico. Who are the targets? The modern prophets could be journalists who want to fairly report what's going on in corrupt regimes and states in the Mexican democracy. And the drug cartels from Colombia to the U.S. Silenced them. And so over 50 journalists in a 5-year period were murdered because they were speaking the truth and alarming people to what's going on. They knew what was happening, a great evil. And it's going on today in Hong Kong. Communist China is trying to suppress completely the Catholic Church, slowly and suffocate it. North Korea, we hear nothing about it. It's like a giant black hole. In this side of the Atlantic Ocean, the richest, which South America and Central America are almost entirely Catholic, majority Catholic. The oil richest country in the Western Hemisphere, I'm told by experts, is Venezuela, with a dictator who suppresses the opposition voice, and he's very Catholic, or he thinks he is. And the second oil richest country in the West is Mexico. So these are not poor countries, and yet something's going on so that there's a lot of poverty and poorness there. Where is the truth to be found? The voices of truth are severely repressed in every age. St. Paul told us this morning that these spiritual evils, these global moral pandemics that suppress the truth, those who execute the prophets, all this began in one man. This is not to pass the buck or blame someone, but this is how it happens. Adam, the first man, through him came sin, and through sin came death. And what Paul adds later in the reading was to say, the cure for this moral pandemic is going to be from one man, the person Jesus Christ, whose resurrection and glory we have recently celebrated, who is at work in the world. But watch how the formula works. If evil can come through one man, and if salvation can also be delivered through one man in response, each of us here then can be that one man or one woman through whom God has to act to take away and overcome the sins of the world, with Jesus as our leader and our strength. He is the antidote and the cure, and he is the reminder to the modern prophets who are still here today in different walks of life and parts of the world, that evil does not have the last word. In fact, the very first sentence in the gospel, 3 words. Fear no one, Jesus says. Don't let them push you around or bully you. Nothing is concealed that will not one day be revealed. The truth will out. And no secret will be concealed that will not one day become known to all. Jeremiah then ends his reading, which begins in fear and terror and threat, because he's identifying the fact that whenever we find ourselves on spot to have to testify the truth, either at the cost of our lives or our career, our employment, how many of our politicians who claim to be part of the Catholic Church in order to save themselves in an election modify their beliefs and teachings about what we consider the truth? Jeremiah says this, though, to strengthen those who want to be brave. The Lord is with me like a mighty champion. My persecutors will stumble. They will not triumph. So sing to the Lord, for he has rescued the life of the poor from the power of the wicked. So it is this faith that we have all embraced that has brought us here in increasing numbers, thank God. A faith like this that gives us power to speak the truth that our society desperately needs today, because many people are deaf to it or don't want to take the risks of Jeremiah and so many others. So we ask God to embolden us through this access to his Son Jesus, and to give us the courage to stand forth for the truth, as Christ has done in many ways throughout the ages.